You order a large pizza, and 30 minutes later, a warm box arrives at your door. We imagine the history of this dish as a cozy, romanticized Italian tradition, but the true origin of this famous takeout food shatters that sanitized image. It's a story built on desperation and rejected peasant meals. The prehistoric ancestors of the dish were purely functional. Ancient Greeks, Persians, and Romans baked simple flatbreads directly over their shields in the field. It was the original military meal prep. These early iterations lacked the rich, heavy toppings we expect today. There was no mozzarella and no pepperoni, just bare baked dough. The environment that finally forced this flatbread to evolve was 1700s Naples. The city was densely packed, highly impoverished, and chaotic, essentially an ancient New York crowded with donkeys. The poorest workers navigating these streets required calories that were fast, filling, and incredibly cheap. Street vendors provided the solution: warm dough topped with coarse salt, lard, garlic, and tiny fish. This early recipe was tightly restricted by class. The wealthy elite looked at the lard-covered bread and actively recoiled, refusing to eat what they considered a filthy meal fit only for starving laborers. Then, in the late 1700s, European trade brought the tomato into Italy. Instead of embracing it, high society panicked. European aristocrats actively avoided the fruit, circulating rumors that a single bite of a tomato was lethally poisonous. The tomato was actually taking the blame for a different killer. The wealthy elite dined on high-status pewter plates, manufactured with high concentrations of lead. This diagram shows the true chemical reaction. The highly acidic tomato juice pulled dark, heavy metal particles directly out of the pewter plates and into the food. The aristocrats were poisoning themselves with their own dinnerware. Down in the Neapolitan slums, the working poor did not own fancy lead plates. Starving and out of sheer necessity, they took a gamble on the suspicious red fruit, crushing it directly over their cheap flatbreads. Their poverty effectively shielded them from the chemical reaction killing the upper class. By combining bread, olive oil, and tomatoes out of desperation, the working class unknowingly established the exact foundational recipe of modern pizza. By 1889, the narrative around this street food began to shift. To survive outside the slums, the dish needed cultural legitimacy. That year, Italy's Queen Margherita visited Naples. A local baker named Raffaele Esposito was tasked with preparing her lunch, placing immense political pressure on his kitchen to impress the royal family. Looking at this breakdown, Esposito presented a pie featuring 3 specific ingredients: bright red tomatoes, white mozzarella cheese, and fresh green basil. Notice what happens when you isolate those colors. Red, white, and green perfectly match the design of the newly unified Italian national flag. The popular legend insists the Queen declared this patriotic pie her favorite. However, historians suspect this story was heavily exaggerated by Esposito himself, a calculated public relations maneuver orchestrated decades before modern marketing. Regardless of its strict historical accuracy, the royal endorsement worked. The myth scrubbed away the recipe's dirty slum origins, finally granting it the elite approval required to cross Europe's rigid class boundaries. While pizza was gaining respect in Italy, millions of Italians were migrating across the Atlantic to the United States during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. They carried their cultural baggage and localized family recipes directly into the cramped tenement neighborhoods of cities like New York. Initially, Americans rejected it. Locals viewed the meal suspiciously, dismissing it as strange, heavily sauced bread that belonged strictly inside ethnic enclaves. The catalyst for change arrived with World War II. Thousands of young American soldiers were deployed to Italy. Exhausted by standard military rations, these troops began eating the authentic local Neapolitan pizza. When their deployments ended, they returned to the United States and demanded the food they had eaten overseas. The returning troops effectively became a highly vocal, unofficial marketing army. Global warfare unintentionally bridged a cultural gap, creating a massive, untapped market for a dish that had previously been ignored. Following the war, the American economic boom of the 1950s shifted the focus of American dining toward the roadside, prioritizing speed and instant service. Pizzerias rapidly integrated into the urban landscape. Bright neon signs glowing on street corners pulled the meal directly into the center of bustling American nightlife. To meet the rising demand, industrialization took over. By the late 1950s and 60s, corporate chains like Pizza Hut and Domino's standardized the baking process and scaled the recipe for massive commercial output. The invention of frozen pizza pushed the boundaries of convenience further. It bypassed the physical restaurant, making a hot pie accessible from any home freezer. As this line chart illustrates, overall consumption spiked between 1950 and 1980. Every time a new delivery network or frozen option launched, the volume of slices eaten shot upward. American manufacturing took an artisanal European creation and maximized its accessibility, turning it into the default menu item for social gatherings. As the meal spread across different states, extreme regional mutations emerged. Chicago baked it into deep dish casseroles, Detroit engineered square industrial pans, and eventually the addition of pineapple sparked culinary debates that still divide consumers today. These modern ingredient-heavy variations sit in stark contrast to the cheap lard, garlic, and fish flatbreads eaten in the 1700s. If you handed a cheese-stuffed barbecue chicken slice to a starving Neapolitan street worker from 3 centuries ago, they would likely look at the creation with confusion and horror. Yet that continuous mutation is exactly why the recipe survived. It endured royal politics, ocean crossings, and global warfare through an unbroken cycle of physical adaptation. Every slice is a living historical record of human migration, poverty, and commercial engineering. So as you take your next bite, you have to ask, what topping belongs on the next chapter of that history?